The story of the Arava begins not with blueprints and engineers, but with a sense of dread that gripped an entire nation. Israel in the 1960s was a country that had survived its birth through war, but the battles were far from over. Surrounded by hostile neighbors, dependent on fragile alliances, and often left vulnerable to embargoes that cut off the flow of weapons and technology, the state lived in a permanent state of alert. For the people, the sky was both a shield and a threat. Every aircraft that appeared on the horizon could be a lifeline or a danger. In this atmosphere of uncertainty, the idea of creating a homegrown aircraft was not simply about ambition, it was about survival. And survival for Israel was never guaranteed. If you want to keep uncovering stories like this one, from the hidden struggles of aviation history to the machines that shaped entire generations of pilots, make sure to subscribe and never miss the next chapter. Imagine a government cabinet room in Tel Aviv, where ministers debated with urgency, their voices tense with the knowledge that foreign partners could turn their backs at any moment. Contracts signed one month could be canceled the next, often under pressure from international politics. What would happen if the supply of parts or planes was suddenly cut off? The answer was terrifyingly simple. Israel would be left exposed. That fear became fuel, driving the leadership to push for self-reliance in defense technology. In the middle of this tension, the Arava was conceived, not as a luxury project, but as a necessary gamble. The Israel aircraft industries was still young, its facilities far from the polished factories of American or European giants. But it was staffed by men and women who understood that failure was not an option. Many of them were immigrants who had brought with them skills learned in the workshops of Europe, the airfields of Britain, or the engineering schools of Eastern Europe. They carried personal memories of war and persecution, and those memories hardened into determination. Building an aircraft in this climate was more than a professional challenge. It was a national mission. The 1960s were an era when aviation technology was advancing rapidly around the world. Jet engines, pressurized cabins, and sleek aerodynamic profiles were reshaping the skies. Yet Israel had to look at its own reality. It did not need an elegant jetliner that could cross continents. It needed something tougher, something that could lift off from a patch of desert, carry soldiers or supplies into places no ordinary aircraft dared, and do it reliably under fire. The contrast between what the global industry was pursuing and what Israel required was stark. While others chased speed and luxury, Israel chased endurance and adaptability. The political backdrop made the stakes even higher. After the Six-Day War of 1967, Israel knew that its survival would continue to depend on rapid mobility and the ability to respond quickly to threats. Embargoes, especially from France, which had been a critical supplier, reminded Israelis that friends could quickly become unreliable. The United States was a partner, yes, but one that provided aid with strings attached, always watching the balance of power in the Middle East. This constant instability taught Israeli planners that true independence could only come from within. The Arava project was one of the clearest expressions of this philosophy, an airplane that Israel could build, operate, and modify without asking permission from anyone. The early days of the project were filled with doubt. Could a small country with limited resources create an aircraft that would stand alongside foreign designs? Engineers debated fiercely over the simplest details, sometimes spending weeks refining the angle of a wing or the height of the landing gear. They knew the design would not win beauty contests. What they aimed for was ruggedness. A farmer's field or a rough strip in the desert had to be enough for takeoff and landing. The landing gear would not retract, because simplicity meant reliability. The body would be short and stubby, because maximizing cargo space mattered more than aerodynamics. It was a design philosophy that seemed strange to outsiders, almost primitive, but within Israel, it made perfect sense. When the first prototypes took shape, their unconventional appearance sparked whispers. Some joked that the plane looked like a flying bus, others said it resembled a box with wings. But the engineers saw something different. They saw an aircraft that could carry troops into battle zones, evacuate wounded soldiers under fire, and haul supplies to isolated communities. They imagined it landing in dust, in mud, even on uneven strips carved hastily in wartime. They knew that one day, this strange-looking machine might mean the difference between life and death for those who depended on it. Every rivet hammered into place carried the weight of history. The men and women working in the hangars were not just constructing metal frames, they were sculpting the embodiment of national resilience. At night, when the factory lights dimmed, the Arava stood in silence, its odd silhouette a reminder of what was at stake. It was not only about flying, it was about proving to the world that Israel could not be broken by embargoes, by threats, or by the expectations of larger nations. The urgency of the era gave the project a momentum of its own. Newspapers speculated cautiously about Israel's aviation capabilities, while military officials kept most details shrouded in secrecy. The people in the streets, however, were less concerned with the look of the plane and more with what it promised, a sign that Israel could defend itself with its own hands. In a country where every family had someone in uniform, the thought of a national aircraft resonated deeply. And so, as the first flights approached, anticipation mixed with anxiety. Would the Arava lift off the runway and prove its worth, or would it stumble, confirming the doubts of those who said Israel was not ready for such ambition? The answer was yet to come, but the story of its birth already carried the tension of a nation on edge. The stakes were no longer theoretical. In the fragile balance of Middle Eastern skies, the Arava had to succeed. And what awaited beyond that first flight would reveal whether this peculiar aircraft would become a forgotten experiment or a quiet symbol of endurance. The first time most people laid eyes on the Arava, they could not decide whether to laugh or to stare in disbelief. Its stubby fuselage, the oversized windows, and above all, the twin boom tail made it look nothing like the sleek aircraft dominating the skies of the 1960s. It was as if someone had taken a bus, chopped off its ends, and attached wings just large enough to lift it into the air. For some critics, it was ugly. For its designers, however, every angle, every line, every rivet was born from necessity. The Arava was not meant to impress, it was meant to endure. The landing gear is the first detail that demands attention. Unlike other transport planes of its time, the Arava's wheels did not retract into the body. They were left exposed, sticking awkwardly beneath the fuselage like heavy boots. To outside observers, this seemed crude, even backwards. But the engineers knew exactly what they were doing. Retractable gear meant more weight, more moving parts, and a greater chance of failure. Fixed gear, on the other hand, meant that the aircraft could slam down on rough strips of dirt or gravel without worrying about fragile mechanisms snapping. In a place where every landing could be on an improvised runway, simplicity was not a flaw, it was survival. Then came the most striking feature, the double tail boom connected by a horizontal stabilizer, giving the rear of the aircraft an unusual H shape. This configuration puzzled many, but it allowed for a cavernous rear door and ramp. Soldiers could march straight in and out, stretchers could be loaded without awkward maneuvers, and bulky cargo could slide smoothly into place. It was a design that seemed awkward in silhouette, yet brilliant in purpose. With the tail elevated and separated, the loading process became quicker, more efficient, and less dependent on ground equipment. In combat zones, seconds saved in loading or unloading could mean lives preserved. Inside the fuselage, the space was startling for such a compact aircraft. The short, boxy body hid a surprisingly wide cabin, allowing for more flexibility in configuration. Troops could sit along the sides, leaving the center open for cargo, or stretchers could be stacked in place during medical evacuations. The Arava could carry around 20 paratroopers, or roughly 2.5 tons of equipment. Not much compared to giants like the C-130 Hercules, but more than enough for the regional missions Israel faced. And, unlike larger planes that required carefully prepared runways, the Arava could bounce into and out of places that looked more like fields than airports. Even the choice of engines spoke to the philosophy behind the design. The Arava was equipped with two Pratt & Whitney PT6 turboprops, engines already known for their reliability. These were not cutting-edge experimental engines, but proven machines that could be serviced quickly and with fewer resources. In Israel's environment, where spare parts might be scarce and missions could not wait, reliability mattered more than power. The turboprops gave the aircraft the thrust it needed without demanding the kind of maintenance nightmares that plagued more advanced designs. For the pilots, the cockpit was intentionally straightforward. They did not sit behind a wall of complex electronics. Instead, they faced a layout designed for clarity and function. The goal was that any trained pilot could step in and fly the Arava without weeks of specialized transition training. This democratization of operation was crucial for a country where every available pilot was a precious resource. War did not allow for long learning curves, and the Arava's simplicity meant that more aircrews could adapt to it quickly. But perhaps the most fascinating part of the Arava's design was how it embodied Israel's understanding of its own geography. The nation was small, its borders never fully secure, and its landscapes varied from deserts to rocky hills. Large strategic airlifters were valuable, yes, but they could not always be where they were needed most. The Arava filled that gap. It could fly low, drop in quickly, and provide mobility in places where bigger, more sophisticated aircraft would never risk venturing. Its clumsy look belied a nimbleness that made it a perfect fit for tactical operations. There were tests in which the Arava demonstrated exactly what it had been built for. Landing on a stretch of earth with stones scattered across it, the plane kicked up dust clouds that blinded those watching from afar. Yet it rolled to a stop, engines humming, cabin intact, ready to unload. In another demonstration, it dropped paratroopers who leapt from its wide rear ramp, their parachutes blossoming against the sky. The aircraft's design made these maneuvers smooth and rapid, reminding commanders that sometimes the oddest-looking tools were the most practical in the harsh realities of war. Curiously, the Arava also found appreciation far beyond Israel's borders. Countries in Latin America, Africa, and Asia saw its ruggedness as a perfect answer to their own needs. In jungles, mountains, and deserts, the ability to land on unprepared strips or carry small but essential loads turned the Arava into a quiet workhorse. It may never have carried the glamour of a jet fighter or the prestige of a strategic bomber, But in the hands of those who needed dependable transport, it became a lifeline. And so the aircraft that many mocked for its appearance proved itself through functionality. The Arava taught a lesson that beauty in aviation was not always found in sleek profiles or shimmering metal. Sometimes it was found in a shape that worked, in a design that fulfilled its mission without compromise. Every unusual curve, every sturdy line of the Arava had a reason, a story rooted in survival and practicality. Yet the question lingered in the minds of observers. Would this ungainly plane, designed with such specific intent, stand the test of real conflict? Could its simplicity and ruggedness truly prove itself in the unforgiving theater of war, where elegance often fell away and only performance mattered? The answers would come not from engineers' drawings or test flights, but from the battlefields themselves, where the Arava would face its harshest trial. When the Arava finally entered service, it carried with it the weight of expectations far larger than its modest frame suggested. It was never intended to dominate the skies or project power across continents, but rather to fill the quiet, relentless needs of a small nation constantly on the edge of conflict. Its mission was as much about practicality as it was about survival. Every time its engine started, it was not just another flight. It was a declaration that Israel could provide for itself, even in the smallest but most crucial aspects of warfare and logistics. One of the defining missions of the Arava was troop transport. With its wide rear ramp and utilitarian cabin, soldiers could be loaded and unloaded in minutes, ready to deploy into areas where combat was imminent. Unlike larger planes that required long, paved runways, the Arava could slip into rugged strips near the front lines, bringing reinforcements where they were needed most. Veterans later recalled the strange comfort of boarding the ungainly aircraft. It did not inspire awe, but it inspired trust. Its low, sturdy stance meant that soldiers carrying gear could step right inside without ladders or complex loading equipment. For young men facing battle, that ease mattered. Equally important were the medical evacuation roles. The Arava could be reconfigured quickly to carry stretchers, medical staff, and supplies. In exercises, and later in real conflicts, it became a lifeline for the wounded. The aircraft could land on strips barely fit for trucks, load the injured, and lift off again within minutes. Pilots told stories of dust-filled landings where the horizon vanished behind a brown haze, and yet the plane emerged intact, carrying men whose lives depended on its resilience. It was in these moments, stripped of glamour, that the Arava's true purpose shone. Beyond combat zones, the Arava also played a quiet but vital role in connecting remote communities. Israel itself was small, but the aircraft found uses in places where infrastructure was thin or non-existent. Humanitarian flights, supply drops, and even simple transport of goods gave the Arava a reputation as a dependable workhorse. This was not lost on other countries. Soon, nations in Latin America and Africa began acquiring the aircraft. In Guatemala, for instance, the Arava became known for its ability to navigate mountainous terrain and serve communities otherwise cut off from the outside world. In Swaziland, it flew missions that larger Western aircraft would never attempt. Wherever roads failed or airstrips were nothing more than clearings, the Arava found its place. In military terms, the aircraft's modest capacity was often its greatest strength. While giants like the Hercules could carry massive loads, they were limited by their need for longer, prepared runways and higher logistical support. The Arava, on the other hand, could dart into small clearings, delivering just enough to tip the balance in a skirmish or sustain an isolated unit. Its small size made it less of a target. Its quick turnaround times made it invaluable. It was the kind of aircraft that might never make the front page of newspapers, but commanders in the field came to depend on it. What surprised many was how adaptable the Arava proved to be. It was not only about carrying cargo or soldiers. Some versions were outfitted with surveillance equipment, becoming eyes in the sky over hostile terrain. Others were converted for maritime patrol, scanning coastlines for suspicious activity. In Latin America, several were even used in anti-narcotics operations, their ability to land almost anywhere making them invaluable in remote jungles. This versatility meant that the Arava's mission stretched far beyond what its original designers had envisioned. The aircraft's legacy was also shaped by its role in training. Paratroopers practiced jumps from its rear ramp, learning how to exit quickly and in formation. For many soldiers, their first leap into the air came from the back of an Arava. In those tense seconds before stepping into the void, the peculiar aircraft became a symbol of the passage into a new kind of courage. The association between the Arava and airborne troops became part of the fabric of military life in Israel and beyond. Of course, the Arava was not without its limitations. Its payload was small compared to larger aircraft, its speed was modest, and its unconventional appearance never quite shed its reputation as a misfit. Critics argued that it was underpowered for some missions, and that its range limited its strategic use. But those critiques often came from those who measured value in terms of prestige or conventional benchmarks. For those who actually relied on it in harsh conditions, the Arava was not judged by how fast it flew or how much it carried, but by whether it got the job done. And time and again, it did. Stories circulated among pilots and crews of the plane's stubborn resilience. One pilot described losing partial engine power during a supply run, yet still managing to coax the Arava onto a rough strip without damage. Another spoke of how the plane endured heavy crosswinds that would have terrified crews and other transports. These anecdotes added to the mythology of the aircraft. Strange looking, maybe even mocked, but tough to the core. What endured most was the symbolism. The Arava was never a glamorous aircraft, but it carried a deeper meaning. It was proof that Israel, small and surrounded by enemies, could build something with its own hands and send it into the skies. Each mission was a statement of independence, a rejection of the idea that survival depended only on the goodwill of foreign suppliers. In this sense, the Arava's mission went beyond logistics. It was part of a narrative of national resilience, a machine that embodied determination as much as engineering. By the time its service years began to wane, the Arava had flown across continents, served in dozens of air forces, and carved a quiet niche for itself as one of the most unassuming yet essential aircraft of its era. It would never be etched into history alongside the legendary fighters or bombers that defined 20th century aviation. But in its shadows, in its dust-filled landings, in its unheralded missions, the Arava proved something equally powerful, that sometimes the most modest machines leave the deepest mark. And so the story of the Arava does not end with the retirement of its airframes. Its legacy lingers in the doctrine of small nations that learned from Israel's example, in the principle that ingenuity and necessity can birth designs that outlast ridicule. The question now is how such aircraft fit into the modern era, where drones and high-tech systems dominate the skies. Does a machine like the Arava still have a lesson to teach about resilience and practicality in an age of complexity? That question remains, and it invites us to look deeper into the future of aviation while remembering the lessons of this strange but unforgettable aircraft.